Hello everybody, welcome back to my channel. My name is Andy. I hope you're doing really well wherever or whenever in the world that you are. Today we're going to be talking all about the books that I read in June. Okay, in June I picked up 19 books and I had one DNF. Something that I noticed is I did have quite a few rereads, maybe more than I was expecting as I was kind of going through the list of books that I read. That was a little bit of a surprise from this month, but let's get into the books. All right, let's first talk about The Island of Sea Women by Lisa C. This was a book club pick for the apartment building that I live in. This is a really interesting World War II era historical fiction, but from a really unique perspective. You're following this group of women, but primarily one woman and her family and like her inner circle during the 1930s, 1940s timeline in a Korean island called Jeju. And these women have a really dangerous profession. They are deep sea divers, kind of. I mean, you know, they don't have the technology that we have in present day, but they're like snorkel deep sea diving. And it's a very matriarchal society where these women are the breadwinners for their families because they do this fishing. And it was just really fascinating to learn about. Like I mentioned, you follow this one woman mostly and her family kind of throughout time. The book does a little bit of timeline jumping, like past and present, which I think is really interesting. And I appreciated that a big chunk of this book is in that iconic World War II historical fiction era, but you get a different perspective. This is really focused on Japanese colonization during that time. And it's not like anything that I've read before. So in that sense, I really appreciated this book. I felt like I learned a lot. It's very immersive, but I didn't love this book. And that was kind of a theme that came up for a lot of people in our book club. People had kind of mixed feelings. So things that I liked, as I mentioned, I found the historical era really interesting. And the main character, Young Suk, is complex. Like, she is not flawless, and her relationships with other women, with her family, I found really compelling. But I did feel like the dialogue in this story feels kind of robotic and choppy. And I can't tell if that's because of the narrator. I did listen to the audiobook and maybe that wasn't quite right for me. It didn't flow in the way that I feel like people communicate. It just feels very stiff. I also struggle quite a bit with the pacing. There were times that felt a little slow and dragged out, and then there were times that I felt we rushed right through. And so that made for kind of like this bumpy ride. And I do feel like it took me out of the story a little bit because it felt kind of distracting. Overall though, I think it's a really interesting story that I do think a lot of people feel is very moving. It is heart-wrenching at times. This family, this community goes through a lot of trauma, a lot of tragedy during this pretty intense time in history, and you definitely feel that as you're reading. So I think if you're looking for World War II historical fiction, but you're feeling tired of just, you know, like Nazi Germany stuff, this could be a really interesting one to pick up. I've also heard, and people in our book club shared this, that they really like a lot of this author's work and that this just wasn't their favorite. So I might consider picking other things up from Lisa C in the future. It was interesting. I gave it 3.5 stars. Next up, we've got Funny Story by Emily Henry. This was our pick for Brat's Who Book, the book club that I'm in with my mom, my sisters, and some of our family friends. And it was an utter delight. I think of the Emily Henry books, this is by far my favorite. I thought Miles was so crushable. I was basically in love with him from page 1. And Daphne really grows on you. I think at the beginning, she feels a little neurotic, a little anxious, like a little judgmental. And then the more time you spend with her and kind of as she's growing throughout the story, she warms up quite a bit and I enjoy her. At our book club, everybody was like giggling and tee-heeing because, you know, there's some steamy scenes Not too many, but there's a few. So it was a very silly book club. I also really love, there's a pretty core element of female friendship in this story. I really appreciated it. I thought it was really meaningful and special and well done. And I love that you get to see Daphne also prioritizing her friendships, not just focusing on her romantic relationship. I think that makes it a more compelling story. My only real criticism of this book is I just kind of wish it was longer. I wanted more time with each character. I wanted more time in their relationship. I wanted more time in the conflict. Overall, I really, really enjoyed it. It was a really fun, light, bingeable read that I think is perfect for summer or if you're on vacation. It was a really good time. I gave Funny Story 4.5 stars. For the buzzwordathon prompt for June, the prompt or the title or the, I don't know what you'd call it, was repeating words. So book in the title that has a word repeated multiple times. For this, I picked up The Boy, the Mole, the Fox, and the Horse by Charlie Mackesy. I'm not 100% sure how to pronounce their last name. And this was very sweet. This is a mostly illustrated story. There is a narrative to it as well, but it's mostly these very sweet doodles. And you're following a boy as he kind of befriends and comes across these different animals in the woods. And they go on a journey together. And it's very much about friendship and love, kindness, compassion, empathy. It's so wholesome. It really, really is. There's also an animated short film version of it available on Apple TV. It's also very, very sweet. I think initially I maybe didn't go into this with the best intentions. I was feeling sort of cynical about everything, and very quickly I was like, oh my God, this is feeling just kind of like the greatest hits of every cheesy self-help like one-liners you've ever heard of. But once I kind of settled into the story a little bit and, quieted that part of my brain and just kind of embraced the story, I do think it's very moving. There are a few lines that really stuck with me that I think are very precious. And I'm not gonna lie, when I watched, because I finished reading it and then I immediately watched the Apple TV version or like the movie version, and I did get a little teary-eyed during the film. So I think if you're craving something that's just gonna make you feel really loved and just, all the warm and fuzzies, this might be a really nice, sweet thing to either pick up and or watch. I gave The Boy, the Mole, the Fox, and the Horse 4 stars. All right, now let's quickly go through my reading roulette picks. I had quite a few. I had 6 picks for the month of June. Typically I have 5, but one of the prompts did not really exist. So I added an additional punishment spin to get 6 total. So let's start. My first reading roulette prompt was a science fiction that was an anti-TBR kind of book. I don't read a lot of science fiction, so this was actually kind of easy for me to pick something up because I'm not drawn towards a lot of science fiction. I was originally planning to read a few other books, and then kind of in the moment, I decided to pick up a more bingeable, fast-paced, kind of kitschy YA science fiction. So I ended up picking up Cinder by Marissa Meyer. This is a Cinderella retelling, and I'm pleasantly surprised by this. The premise of this world is that you've got humans and then you've got cyborgs and other beings, but that's kind of the gist. And you're following this main character, Cinder, as she's trying to survive during this deadly plague that their nation is experiencing. I'm not gonna lie, it hits a little too close to home considering, our recent past. But yeah, I thought it was really fun. Cinder is a very likable, charming character who's very easy to root for. There's a few side characters that I also really liked and found pretty compelling. There's a quintessential romance at its core. I think my complaint is, in my mind, and I think this is just, I went into this book with the wrong expectations. I thought this was a series of kind of interconnected standalones, within this lunar world, and like this was gonna be a completed story of Cinder and the guy. Oh my God, whose name I'm already forgetting. Doesn't really matter, but it's not. It ends on sort of a cliffhanger, kind of open-ended note where I'm like, ugh, do I need to pick up the next book? I don't know. So I think it's really fun. I'm glad that I picked it up, actually. It's one that's been on my radar for many, many, many years. I think it's a creative reimagining of Cinderella's story. Like, it didn't feel overdone or too repetitive and redundant. So we'll see. We'll see if I continue on. I'm genuinely not sure if I'll move forward in this series, but you never know. I gave it 3.5 stars. For my next reading roulette spin, I had a historical romance that incorporated animals somewhere in the story, on the cover, in the title. And for this, I picked up The Wallflower Wager by Tessa Dare. This was a reread, but it has been many years since I picked this series up. And overall, I loved it. It was such a good time. You're basically following Lady Penelope, who you've met in earlier books in this series, and for reasons, she ends up working with her neighbor to try and find all of these animals in her essential like farm that she has at her estate to find them homes. Overall, I mean, Penelope is just like kind of eccentric, very sweet, like just so easy to like. And Gabe is really portrayed as this tough and serious on the surface, but like deep down, he's like such a softie. He's such a cinnamon roll. And I really liked that dynamic. Their relationship had me smiling the entire time. The plot is really light and fluffy. It's such an easy, quick read. You know, is it the greatest literature of all time? Absolutely not. But it's a good time. And I really enjoyed it. I had such a good time with my reread. I gave it 4 stars. All right. Next on my reading roulette spins, we ended up with a fan fiction, originally with a stunning cover, but like that doesn't really exist, / I don't know how to find that. So we respun the miscellaneous wheel to get a fan fiction with animals. Because like, of course, the randomizer wheel would pick the same thing twice. For this, I didn't end up picking up anything. So this prompt has been added on my wheel to the lost prompts section. My next reading roulette spin was a graphic novel that has a favorite trope of mine. For this, I picked up, I don't know if it's Spy X Family or just Spy Family by Tetsuya Endo. And I loved this. I picked it up because I thought there was a marriage of convenience, and that is sort of true, but it's more a fake dating trope, which I wasn't expecting. Essentially, you've got this main guy, oh my God, what is his name? Leo? No, Lloyd. And he's a spy, and he goes on this mission, and part of the mission, he needs to find a wife and find a child because he's trying to infiltrate this school. The wife has a unexpected profession, and the daughter has some very unique abilities, and they make a really interesting team. I could totally see myself picking up future volumes. I had such a good time with this. It put me in such a good mood. It was really, really fun. Anya, the daughter, low-key might be one of my favorite new characters, like, of all time. She was so funny. I genuinely laughed out loud a few times. I'm really glad I picked this up. It was fun. I gave it 4 stars. My next reading roulette pick was a fantasy TBR veteran. I was planning to complete Words of Radiance, and I didn't read 1 page of Words of Radiance in the month of June, so also didn't get to that prompt. That prompt has also gone on the lost prompts on my reading roulette wheel. So my final reading roulette pick in June was a fantasy romance that had a green cover. For this, I had a few in mind. One of the DNFs I'll speak to in just a few minutes, but I ended up picking up A Fragile Enchantment by Allison Saft, and this was okay. You're following, I don't know if you pronounce her name Neem or Neve, but she has this magical gift where she can weave emotions into fabrics, into wardrobes and outfits, and she's hired to create all of the fancy outfits for a prince and his betrothed for their upcoming nuptials, their upcoming wedding. And of course, along the way, she gets to know the prince a little bit more. The book is going for like a grumpy sunshine kind of vibe, and forced proximity, they like each other, hence romance. I just thought this is kind of underwhelming. It's definitely a very low stakes fantasy romance. So if you're looking for something with a lot of tension and angst that's really gonna keep you turning the pages, like on the edge of your seat, this is not gonna do that for you. It's kind of predictable, kind of meandering. It's sweet. I don't know. It was just okay. It's very PG. I like a little more oomph in my romances in general. But I think if you're new to romantasy or fantasy romance and you're not craving anything particularly spicy, you want just kind of a wholesome, sweet story, this might be perfect for you. I just think for me, I felt underwhelmed. I didn't feel completely invested, and it was just okay. I gave it 3 stars. Now let's go into all the other books that I picked up, either on a whim, because I was in the mood, or just things that I've been meaning to finish. So let's start with The Surviving Sky by Kritika Rao. This was a continuation from my May reading roulette, where I had to pick up a seasonal science fiction. I had read most of it in May, I just didn't quite finish it, so I finished it in June. You're following these 2 characters. They are a married couple, Ahilya and Iravan. In this world, Earth is no longer habitable, and so they've found a way to live safely kind of above Earth's surface in these floating islands. The way that they get these islands to stay afloat is they have people with these magical abilities called architects, and Iravan is one of those architects, and Ahilya is not. So anyways, you get a really interesting push and pull between these 2 characters. They have a really fascinating relationship that is not all warm and fuzzies. It's complicated. There's some real conflict between the 2 of them, and you get a little bit of the context for that, and you get to see them in real time, kind of working through some of the main conflict in the plot. This was just so fascinating. I thought the world building was really interesting. The character development is really interesting. Your impressions of these 2 main characters at the beginning looks very different than it does at the end, which I really appreciate. I think some of the nitty-gritty of like how this all works is a little convoluted, and some of it just kind of went over my head. But I think if you could just kind of, put that aside and just embrace the story, it doesn't detract from the plot or the enjoyment of reading it. It's a very cool story. I'm glad that I read it. I think I'll definitely eventually pick up the second book. I don't know when, but the end of the first book like really sets you up for the next one. So I definitely want to complete this little duology. It was really interesting. I enjoyed it more than I thought, considering science fiction like isn't always my jam. I gave it 3.5 stars, but like rounded up to 4. It's really unique. At least to me, it felt really fresh. After I read The Wallflower Wager, I was still kind of craving some of that historical romance, which you'll see in just a minute. So I picked up Wicked and the Wallflower by Sarah MacLean. I've picked up a few things by Sarah MacLean in the past, and she's sort of a hit or miss author for me. This was a miss. I didn't love this story. To be completely honest, I don't remember the characters' names. I don't remember the plot of this at all. This has not stuck with me in any way, shape, or form. I gave it 3 stars, but even now that feels kind of generous. I remember the plot feeling so convoluted, and I really didn't understand the characters' motivations. If I remember correctly, they're like working together for mutual benefit, but I don't know. Obviously hasn't stuck with me. I just don't think Sarah MacLean is like the historical romance author for me. I don't find her passionate scenes to be very realistic or convincing. Like the chemistry is kind of hit or miss with her characters. So this is not one that I would recommend. It was just okay. It was really just okay. I don't think I have anything else of note to say, at least not in this moment. I found on Hoopla a like 3-book compilation of one of Kate Bateman's series. I loved it because I got to read 3 books for the price of 1 download, which is great. If you don't know, on Hoopla, you can only download 10 titles a month. So I really got my bang for my buck with this one. This is her Secrets and Spies series. The first book is To Steal a Heart. The second book is A Raven's Heart. And the third book is A Counterfeit Heart. The third book is definitely my favorite in this series, but they're all kind of comfortable 3.5 4-star reads. It's pretty formulaic, but it's a formula, it's a template that I love. Each story weaves a romance kind of with a background mystery plot, and they're all really fun. I don't have anything revolutionary to say. If you want to read the individual synopses on Goodreads, like, you should do that. I don't think you have to read them in order. Yes, characters and the setting like comes up in each of them. It's interconnected, but you certainly don't have to read all 3 of them. If you picked up only one, I would recommend A Counterfeit Heart. That was my favorite. The steamy scenes are all like very passionate in all of these books. I love how Kate Bateman writes chemistry. The second one, A Raven's Heart, there's a lot of like flirty, fun banter and a lot of teasing that I think is really charming and fun. Overall, just a really good time. I enjoyed all 3. I think I gave, let me pull up my spreadsheet. I gave To Steal a Heart 3 stars, A Raven's Heart 3.5, and A Counterfeit Heart 4 stars. So all in all, a good time. I read one more historical romance. I read A Lady for a Duke by Alexis Hall. This is a really interesting historical romance. You're following our main character who is trans, and I feel like that representation is hard to find in romance in general, especially with like traditionally published things, but also with historical romance. So I really appreciated that representation. I think Alexis Hall takes a lot of care and dignity as she's created this character and her story arc. I do think it has a bit of a slow-ish start, but then the more time you spend with Viola and with Gracewood, the more connected you feel to these characters. So I think if you can make it past the first 35%, it is well worth it. I just think it's a really beautiful love story. The steamy scenes are really intimate and raw and honest, and they're very sweet and tender. I really was pleasantly surprised because I was struggling a little bit at the beginning. I kept feeling like, I don't know if this is for me. I'm not really feeling invested in the storyline. Essentially, Viola is thought to have died during this war, and so when she comes back to town, she kind of gets reconnected with her childhood best friend. At the beginning, she hasn't disclosed to Gracewood like who she is. Of course, she eventually does, and it's kind of just about them reconnecting and about her figuring out who she is. And there's also some other smaller plot lines that come up, but overall, it was good. I enjoyed it. I think I gave it, did I give it 3.5 or 4 stars? I gave it 4 stars. So I liked it. That was the rest of the historical romance that I picked up, but then I shifted into contemporary romance, and I wanted to read just for the summer, which is Abby Jimenez's new release in her Part of Your World series. So I did a little reread. I read Part of Your World and 5 stars. I'm obsessed with it. This book, to me, if you've ever watched Heart of Dixie, really captures that same, she's a city slicker, smart, kind of stuck-up doctor, and he's a country guy. I just love their duo. I think some people get a little frustrated in this one with the miscommunication trope, because that's certainly present, and some of it is like the reason that they can't be together feels like a little silly, because like they're grown-ups and can do whatever they want. But this was my favorite book of 2022. I loved it. I've reread it probably 4 or 5 times. I love Alexis and Daniel so much. I want to go to that inn that he runs. I'm obsessed. It's really a good one. Abby Jimenez, her new releases are just phenomenal. They're so good. I'm obsessed. So I read Part of Your World, then I reread Yours Truly. I gave this 4.5 stars. I also love this one. So in this one, you're following Brianna, or Bree, and you meet her in the first book. She's good friends with Alexis. She's an ER nurse, or an ER, some fancy doctor in the ER. and then you meet Jacob, and he's also working in the ER with her. They don't hit it off right away. They have kind of a bad meet cute, if you will, but they sort of get to know each other through writing these letters, and then a fake dating situation ensues. Jacob has anxiety, so if you're looking for some really carefully done mental health representation, I think this is a really good one to pick up. And their relationship is just very sweet. Both characters are really compelling and you really like each of them individually. And I think together it's just all the better. Brianna in this book in particular is so funny. Some of her commentary genuinely makes me laugh out loud. What can I say? I really, really liked this one. 4.5 stars. It was great. And then I read Just for the Summer. This was so good. The premise of this one is very funny. Justin and Emma both have this curse where every person that they're in a relationship with, when they break up, that person then goes on to find their soulmate. And the two of them, Justin and Emma, kind of bond over a Reddit thread because they both feel like they have this curse. So they decide to start dating each other as a way to kind of break this curse. This is probably, I could see this being my favorite book, but definitely my favorite romance of this year. I loved Emma. I loved Justin. I loved them together. The plot is paced really well, and I really think it's compelling. There's some really nuanced representation of mental health, specifically with like early childhood trauma and attachment styles and things like that, that I don't know that I've ever seen it done this well before. And it makes sense because Abby Jimenez worked very closely with some mental health professionals. And like, you can really tell these characters feel so real, so whole, so imperfect. I think that their relationship is beautiful. It's a very moving story. I felt really seen by this book. I feel a little emotional. I think if you're looking for a really light, fun beach read kind of book, I don't quite think this is it. It's a little too heavy to just be like, ooh, fun and flirty. There's some really sad stuff that comes up in this book. But if you're looking for a romance that's more than just kind of a kitschy, cheesy rom-com, this is it. You've got to read it. I feel passionate about how much I love this. Abby Jimenez is feeling like the romance author where I've had some people ask me, like, what's your favorite book? Or like, what's the book that you recommend to everybody? And Abby Jimenez, specifically the books in her Part of Your World series, are feeling like that recommendation for me. To anyone who's like wanting to maybe pick up a romance, like, these books are so good. Just for the Summer was excellent. I loved it. I loved it. Okay, so after I read all this historical romance, and after I read all this contemporary romance, then I moved on to fantasy romance. Can you tell I was in a very particular kind of mood? So one of the things that I picked up was Slaying the Shadow Prince, which is by Helen. I really need to look up how you pronounce this author's name. I struggle every single video, every time I talk about it. But anyways, this is not in the Legends of Thesmar series like as itself, but it's in the world and you're following one of the characters who comes up in that series. It's a Wraith Hunter romance, kind of like enemies to lovers. I liked getting Talamir's story and I really liked Drew as the heroine. I think they complemented each other really well. I don't know that it's the best thing that I've ever read. I don't know that I would necessarily recommend this series, even though I do think it's pretty popular, especially on like social media. I think it's okay. I think it's an okay series. But I like picking it up. I like getting a little more context into some stuff that you hear about in the first couple of books. So I liked it. I gave it 3 stars. All right, then I picked up The Gilded Wolves because I picked it up for fantasy romance with a green cover. And I don't know what it is about this book. I've tried twice now to pick up this story. It's a heist, I think fantasy romance, but like definitely a heist story at its core. I don't know what it is. I've made it to about the same point both times, both in 2021 or 2022 when I first picked it up, and again this past June. I DNF'd it around 10%. The beginning just I felt disoriented and sort of like confused about what's going on. I didn't feel kind of immediately captivated and invested in the world. So I like feel like I would really like this series. I just need to maybe try it again and picking it up because like I want to read it, not because it fits a reading roulette prompt or just for shits. Like, I think I need to be craving a heist kind of story and then try, maybe third time's the charm. But you know, I didn't get far enough to really have anything meaningful to say other than I just wasn't really in the mood for this. So I put it down. I also read the second prequel in the Mortal Fate series by byeee. It's called The Sword. In this story, you're following Soren's point of view and you're getting a lot of world building kind of from his perspective. And it was fine. Like, I gave it 2.5 stars. I understand the purpose of this prequel. And I think after reading the first book in that series, you do get a lot of tension created by reading these two novellas. So I think if you're considering picking up the Mortal Fate series, you should pick up the prequels, even though this one in particular is kind of dry. It was fine. I did really enjoy the first full-length novel in this series called A Crown of Oaths and Curses. In this story, you get alternating chapters. You get a Soren chapter, then you get a Rook chapter, and it kind of goes back and forth. And you know, here's my biggest takeaway. I love Rook. I am a Rook stan. Like, she is such a baddie because not only is she actually a badass and she can really like hold her own, take care of herself, but she is a really thoughtful character. She's very empathetic. She's introspective and she's just a more compelling character to me. She's more complex. Like, she feels more real to me. Soren, I kind of dread all of Soren's chapters. His voice, not like the narration voice, but like his character voice is frustrating to me. He's really stubborn. He's like very short-sighted. He's not a very curious or thoughtful character. Like, he's just kind of like, this is what it is and I'm right, so this is how I'm gonna think. As he learns and observes new things, like, he doesn't take any of that into consideration. And again, like, I understand why he is that way. Again, that's why it's so important, I think, to read those prequels, because I get it. But I was also like tired of it. It got old. So anyways, it's a very fun enemies to, well, in this first book, you don't ever get to the lovers part. They're just fucking enemies. They do not like each other, especially Soren. He's just out there hating all of the witches. But yeah, I think the world building is interesting. I think the magic is interesting. I really like some of the side characters. The plot is relatively compelling, although there's some pacing issues, I think, in this first book. The end definitely ends on like a, oh my God. So I immediately jumped into the next one, although I'm not finished with it quite yet. But, you know, it was fun. I'm glad that I'm reading it. I think he gets a lot of hype, and I don't know that it's worth the hype, but you know, I'm enjoying it. I'm glad I picked it up. I gave this first book 4 stars. Okay, I think that's all of the books that I picked up in June. Like I said, 19 books, 1 DNF, not too bad. The highest rated book that I had, of course, was Just for the Summer by Abby Jimenez. And my lowest rated book was The Sword by byeee. I get that prequel, but I didn't like that prequel, you know? I read almost exclusively romance of various subgenres. And I'm not gonna lie, at the time of filming this, I'm in July now, I'm feeling a little slumpy. I'm in the middle, I think, of too many things right now. So I'm feeling kind of overwhelmed, and I really haven't picked up anything in July, which is crazy for me, but oh well, it is what it is. I'll get out of it eventually. So anyways, that's all I got for you guys today. I hope you guys had a fun June reading month. Let me know what you read in June, some highlights, some lowlights. I'd love to know all of your thoughts. Have you read any of these books that I picked up in June? What are some of your reading plans for July? You know, really feel free to share anything. You know, leave a little emoji, maybe a little, I don't know. Honestly, put a little fire at the bottom if you made it, because it's so hot here. I can't get over how hot I am. Anyways, thank you for watching. I appreciate you, and I'll see you in the next video soon. Bye.